So in this video, I'm going to be giving you the top 3 most important things that you need to do or look out for when you are going to buy a second-hand Mazda MX-5. So who am I? My name is Kyle and I own a MX-5 performance shop here in Brisbane, Australia. I've also built copious amounts of these cars for myself and I've been working in and around the Mazda MX-5 for just over 8 years now. I work on these cars literally every day and I'm confident with these 3 things, you will feel far more confident and more knowledgeable when you go to inspect a Mazda MX-5 for sale. So let's get straight into the video because these 3 things cannot wait. And I know you are eager to go out and just buy your newest pride and joy. So let's get straight into it. I first of all just want to give you a really quick guide so you know what you're looking at and what you're getting. There are various makes and models with various different engines in MX-5s. There's the NA6, the NA8, the NB8A, the NB8B, and the NB8C. Sounds far more complicated than it really is. The NA6s have a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine with 2 variations, a short nose crank and a long nose crank. You can see here in these pictures, the long nose crank has 8 cutouts in the crank and the short nose has 4. Typically, I tried to avoid this short nose as they are prone to engine failure with crank wobble. Now the NA8s, they came with a 1.8 litre engine. The NB8B came with a 1.8 litre engine. Not very different, just some differences in the intake manifold. Once you get into the NB8B realm, you are looking at a VVTi 1.8 litre engine paired with a 6-speed, not a 5-speed. So make sure you know what you're looking at and you know what you're buying.
So to summarize, here are all our engines: NA6, NA8, NB8A and NB8B. The NA6s have the intake pipe that go under the thermostat housing, whereas the NA8 motors have the intake that goes over the thermostat housing. So there's your dead giveaway on which motor you're dealing with if you're looking at NAs. If you're looking at NBs, your dead giveaway is the VVTi oil pipe on top of the valve cover on the NB8Bs. If it does not have this, then you're looking at an NB8A non-VVTi motor. So this is my multicolored panel 1989 MX-5 behind me. This is a NA6 chassis and I have swapped a 1.8 litre NA8 engine into it. So if you're a bit confused about the 1.6 versus 1.8, most of this will be relevant across all engines. Okay, there will be a few specific things that I mention that will only relate to 1.6, 1.8 generation 1 and 1.8 generation 2. But for the most part, all of this is cross-engine across all of the different NA and NB engines. The first thing we're going to be covering in this video is rust. Rust is an absolute car killer, and if you are looking at a second-hand car that does have rust, you need to be really vigilant about how bad and how far the rust has gone. If you're popping your head under a bonnet or under a chassis and you see some surface rust and you can kind of just poke it with a screwdriver and it seems solid and it looks fine, you're gonna be okay for the most part. But if you are getting under a chassis and there is a hole or there is any rust hole whatsoever, it's probably smart that you just walk away. Now let's get into the most common spots that these cars tend to rust. A really common spot for the NA NBs is down here on the A-pillar and up along here. So water gets trapped under this seal, runs down below here, and then all of this starts rusting. So definitely check that spot. Now the absolute main spot that you will see these cars rust is right about here. Okay, and this is because on the soft top NA NBs, the rain rail from the soft top that runs all around here, it drains right through there. And that drain actually pops out under there. So you have to be super careful you don't have any rust in that area there. Now, really another common area for rust in these cars is inside the boot. And I'm gonna be showing you this on my drift car because I've actually got some rust in the boot of my drift car right now. So what happens is lithium batteries can explode and they can leak battery acid. Once that battery acid starts leaking, it will corrode the absolute crap out of your boot. So in here you can see I have a little bit of rust. You can see that rust in the corner there. That's the only rust I have in this car. But you definitely want to be checking in there behind the battery and then all along these rails, pretty much anywhere in the boot. Because if battery acid has ever gotten into this car, it's not going to be good. These seals on the boot also, if someone has ever installed an aftermarket tire rack or anything like that, will leak straight through here. If the taillights of these cars have been removed often, also that seal will be compromised, and then water, every time this person washes the car, water will go inside here and just pile up under the battery, and it will cause Rust City. One that I haven't seen too often, but that is definitely worth mentioning, is the rust
where the sway bars connect to the chassis. So right under here and right under here on the frame rails. So right about here is what I'm talking about, and up there. Really don't want rust in those spots, trust me. When buying any secondhand car, it's always good to jack the car up or even just get under the car if you can. If the person that's selling it is okay with you doing that, I highly recommend getting under the car. Underneath here, so this is our front subframe, and this can rust out if it's been hit, if it's been sitting in water, if the car's been flooded, anything like that. You can see rust pile up on this subframe. This one is absolutely fine because this one's been painted quite a few times. So the rust on this, there is literally no rust. So that one's all good. But opposed from those spots, a car can rust literally anywhere. So just make sure you're being vigilant, you're doing your checks, you're going around the car, under the car, over the car, engine bay, interior, because rust is a car killer, so just be wary. Okay, the second thing we're gonna be going over in this video is the commonalities of the engine failure points. All through NA to NB, the engines have very common failure points. Now, very common failure points on these engines. Straight away, open the bonnet of a MX5 that I'm looking to buy. First thing I would check, this cover here is called your rocker cover. It covers the cams inside the engine. Now these are very common things to leak. They have a gasket that sits along this line here. And if you're seeing oil come down the cylinder head, like all around there, 99% of the time, it's your rocker cover gasket. Super common. Number two, the cam angle sensor. This has an O-ring that sits inside it like that, and it's very common for them to leak. So if you are getting an oil leak come from the back of the engine here, it's most probably going to be that O-ring in the cam angle sensor. For the next few ones, we're gonna have to go up on the hoist. Now we're gonna go around the whole underside of the engine, and I'm gonna show you all the components that typically tend to fail on these vehicles. Okay, so failure point number one. So we're looking at the engine from the underside. This right here is our crank pulley. So the crank will have a seal, a circular seal that press fits over the crank, and that is called your front main seal. Now, if you are seeing oil pool up under here on your sump, and you can't see any oil coming from up there, it's more than likely gonna be your front main seal. Now, it is sort of hard to completely diagnose a front main seal on these engines because the cam seals, which sit at the top of the engine, also leak pretty profusely. So I would really investigate around the timing covers, all around here, to see if any oil is really coming from up top. But if you can't see any oil whatsoever, it's probably gonna be that front main seal. And that can be a fairly costly thing to get fixed. Now, the sumps don't really tend to leak on these cars. Like they do, but they don't. It's not something that I've seen all the time on many cars. Like probably my two cars are the only ones that I've seen actually leaking. So don't really need to worry about that. The other major thing that leaks on these cars is what's called a rear main seal. So we just did the front main, which is the front of the crankshaft. Now we're talking about the rear main, which is the rear of the crankshaft. Behind this clutch is a big circular seal that goes around the crank, and that seals the sump and everything else off from the transmission. Bear in mind, this car does not have a transmission on it right now. So if you're getting oil pool up under here, and you work your way up and it's not coming from that crank angle sensor up there, or the valve cover, you can fairly confidently say it is the rear main. And the rear main is gonna cost a hell of a lot of money to replace. So just keep that in mind when you're going through these cars. If you're getting oil pool up right at the back of the sump or under the transmission, and it's not coming from the crank angle sensor, chances are you're gonna be up for a rear main. Okay, so in my experience, they are the top things that you have to look out engine oil leaking wise. We've got the rocker cover gasket, the cam angle sensor, the crank seals, the front main seal, and the rear main seal. They are your 5 biggest oil leakers on the Mazda Miata engines. Now the water pumps are somewhat common to leak on these as well. I'll just quickly show you that. To be honest, they're not that common, but if you do have a leaking water pump, you're gonna know about it. Okay, so our water pump, if we're looking at the engine from the front like this, we're looking at our engine from the front, we have our crank pulley. If we go up, we have our alternator, and then the center pulley up there is the water pump pulley. Now, if you can see any coolant coming down through here, or any water or coolant coming from this, chances are you have a failed water pump. And let me tell you, replacing water pumps ain't cheap. So that's pretty much everything you're gonna need to know in terms of what to look for when looking for rust
and the most common engine failure points. When you're buying a secondhand JDM car, there's always going to be risk involved, and there are a few things you can do to minimize that risk. If you're in Australia, one, you can do a PPSR check, which is checking the written off vehicle registry to see whether that car's been smashed or hit or run or stolen or anything like that. So for one, just do that check. I think it's like $2, so definitely do that. A few like little checks that you can do when you're actually at the car in person is you can check the body lines. You check where the bonnet lines up to the headlights, check where the door closes up against the rear quarter panel. Because if the body line on one side is significantly different to the other side, that's probably been in an accident or something's happened. Maybe it's had a door replaced or something like that and it's been hidden. So there are so many things to check when buying a secondhand car, especially a secondhand JDM car. So just be smart. Go through your list, write all this down before you go to inspect the car. And yeah, so I'll just quickly rattle off those key points that you need to be checking. So for one, check for rust in the right-hand rear sills, like under the soft tops, in the A-pillars. Check for common engine failure, cam seals, front main, rear main, under the gearbox, under the sump. A little bonus, check if there's check the coolant res bottle. Is there the specified amount of coolant in there? Is there coolant coming from the water pump that I showed you earlier? Check your body gaffs. Are there doors lining up properly on both sides? Does the boot line up? Does the bonnet line up? Little things that you can do whilst you're walking around. And the final bit is just do a revs check. Check the car's history if there is no history. And then just make the decision based off what you think after you've collaborated all that together. And I'm sure you'll make the right decision. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you thumbs it up. Let me know down in the comments if you want a buyer's guide more in depth or for any other model, the NCs or the NDs, or maybe even just straight NBs. But I'll leave you there. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you go watch my other content because there's plenty of it. And I'll see you soon. Peace.